Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're tearing into a massive geopolitical puzzle using Sean Dempsey's analysis, The Shadow of Escalation, Origins of the Iran Conflict. Right off the bat, Dempsey presents us with a staggering, almost unbelievable paradox. How did two nations end up going to war over a threat that intelligence experts explicitly say doesn't even exist? Seriously. We're going to break down exactly how this massive escalation defied literally decades of hard data.
Just look at this glaring contradiction. The public justification shoved down everyone's throats for military action was the imminent, terrifying threat of an Iranian nuclear weapon. Yet the actual intelligence reality, confirmed by our own CIA and State Department, was that Iran hadn't had an active nuclear weapons program since 2003. Dempsey points out that this makes the public messaging effectively naked war propaganda. And as someone who questions official narratives for a living, I have to ask, if the intelligence community knew for a fact the threat wasn't real, why did this conflict happen anyway?
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. We'll start with the core nuclear paradox, move to the intelligence consensus, cover strategic and regional rivalries, then politics and bureaucracy, the preventive war doctrine, and finally, a multi-factor conclusion.
Section 2. The Intelligence Consensus. Decades of consistent reporting. Before we can even start exploring the why, we absolutely have to establish the baseline of what U.S. intelligence was actually saying. Back in December 2007, the National Intelligence Estimate stated with high confidence that Tehran halted its nuclear weapons program in the fall of 2003. Notice they didn't say paused, they said halted. This wasn't a guess, this was the heavily vetted, agreed-upon consensus of the entire United States intelligence apparatus.
And this wasn't just a 2007 phenomenon either. As Dempsey's curated appendix clearly shows, this consensus held steady for years. Fast forward to March 2015. We have the Director of National Intelligence at the time, James Clapper, stating unequivocally that Iran's leadership hadn't even made the decision to obtain a nuclear weapon. He testified to this fact on the record repeatedly to the Senate Intelligence Committee.
The sheer consistency here is just wild. From the 2003 halt to the 2007 report to Clapper in 2015, straight through to March 2025 when Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard testified that Iran was still not pursuing nuclear weapons. 2 full decades of absolute consistency, right up to the very moment of escalation. So with this firm, undeniable baseline established, we have to look at the alternative theories. What actually caused this?
Section 3. Strategic and Regional Rivalries. Let's explore theories 1, 2, and 3.
So, if it wasn't about an active bomb, what was it? Theory 1 is essentially capability versus intent. While the intelligence focused on Iran's lack of intent, hawkish policymakers basically moved the goalposts. They focused entirely on Iran's capacity as a threshold state. They argue that Iran's advanced centrifuges were shortening its breakout time. To these hawks, intent can change overnight. So they deemed military action necessary before a technological line was crossed, completely regardless of what Iran was actually doing at the time.
Theory 2 shifts the focus over to Israeli strategic pressure. Israel has long viewed a potentially nuclear-capable Iran as a literal existential threat. Dempsey's sources indicate Israeli leadership believed that waiting around for definitive proof of weaponization was basically suicidal. Fearing a future of Iranian nuclear latency, they calculated that their window to strike was closing fast, and they aggressively pushed for U.S. involvement following the initial strikes in June 2025.
Then we have Theory 3, which brings in the cold, hard calculus of realpolitik. Under this theory, the whole nuclear issue? Just a convenient public justification, a smokescreen. Iran's real crime in the eyes of Washington was threatening regional hegemony. They were dominating the U.S.-aligned Gulf monarchies, backing proxy groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis, and challenging American naval dominance right around the Strait of Hormuz. For a lot of folks in power, this made Iran strategically intolerable, with or without a nuclear program.
Section 4. Politics and Bureaucracy. Moving on to Theories 4 and 5.
Theory 4 examines domestic political incentives. And honestly, this is the classic wag the dog scenario. Wars naturally create a rally around the flag effect. Critics argue, and I think rightly so, that confrontation with Iran was viewed as a highly useful redirection away from intense domestic economic stress, rampant inflation, and declining approval ratings. It's naked war propaganda, which is incredibly common for governments to use to trick their own people into supporting a conflict. Because if you think about economists like Murray Rothbard, they hit the nail on the head. War is the health of the state. It massively expands executive power. though to be fair to Dempsey, he cautions against treating this as one giant singular conspiracy.
But that domestic pressure often feeds right into Theory 5, bureaucratic momentum. Let's trace how this builds. It's the dark reality that massive national security systems naturally drift toward conflict. First, sanctions intensify. Next, proxy warfare expands. Then, massive assets like U.S. carrier groups are heavily deployed, until diplomatic trust just collapses completely. Defense contractors and military planners become so financially and structurally invested in this pathway that by 2025 the system was so primed, a single spark made direct conflict practically inevitable.
Section 5. The Preventive War Doctrine. Exploring Theory 6.
Theory 6 rests on a deeply ingrained, somewhat terrifying philosophy in Washington, the preventive war doctrine. Some American strategists genuinely operate on the belief that the U.S. absolutely must strike rising adversaries before they become too powerful. It's the exact same logic that drove the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Applied to Iran, the chilling rationale was basically, even if they don't currently have a bomb, preventing the mere possibility of one forever is worth the horrifying cost of war.
Section 6. A multi-factor conclusion, interpretations, and outcomes.
So how do we tie all these threads together? It really comes down to Theory 7, interpretive differences. And this brilliantly illustrates how the game is played. While the intelligence consensus clearly stated Iran had halted its program, Hawks weaponized a tiny nuance. The agency said Iran was not building a bomb yet. Hawks took that and argued that not building one yet doesn't guarantee they will never build one. The momentum for war was never really about disputing the facts on the ground. It was about twisting the interpretation of a hypothetical future risk.
Ultimately, as Dempsey concludes, this conflict wasn't caused by a single smoking gun. It's a massive, complex web. You have Israeli security doctrine taking up one slice, domestic politics taking up another, layered over deep ideological hostility. But if you want my personal take on this, looking at Sean Dempsey's list, I think it's the toxic combination of the wag-the-dog domestic distractions and that unstoppable bureaucratic momentum. When politicians need to hide from economic failures and the defense industry is already primed for a fight, they just manufacture the consent they need.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought. We literally saw 2 decades of explicit, consistent intelligence stating Iran was not building a nuclear weapon. 2 decades. Yet, the war happened anyway. So if modern conflicts are genuinely driven by overlapping strategic fears, bureaucratic momentum, and politicians desperate for a distraction, how can factual intelligence ever hope to outweigh the sheer momentum of the war machine? It's a critical question we all need to ask ourselves as we navigate foreign policy today. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer. Keep questioning the narrative, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.